Hello and welcome to Primis Presents. Today we're talking to Christopher Smith, a serial founder who has held leadership roles at companies later acquired in transitions totaling hundreds of millions of dollars. He helped commercialize digital identity infrastructure and later built a digital safety platform focused on identity resilience, fraud prevention, and behavioral intelligence. He understood the fundamentals of digital security, but none of it protected him when it began as a personal relationship, evolved into what he believes was a coordinated campaign targeting him. Today, we're going to explore what happened, how synthetic identity fraud works, why investigating international cybercrime is so complex, and how he turned a nightmare into a mission to protect millions. Christopher, welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be with you, Cheryl. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for being with us. First of all, please take me back to August 8th, 2019, the day you got that Apple email about your iPhone.
Sure. So prior to that day, I had started to work with people to understand if my identity had been compromised and my entire digital footprint had been compromised. Obviously, this happens to millions and millions of people, unfortunately, every year around the world. And I was driving into San Francisco and I got an email from Apple that said, "Thank you so much for chatting with us about your Best Buy appointment to go update your iPhone." And obviously I was in the car. I hadn't been speaking with Apple on the way to San Francisco. And then it became very clear that my Apple iCloud had been compromised and that someone was trying to set up an appointment at a Best Buy to get a new device with all my credentials on it, because Best Buy would have thought it was me. So that's when I started to realize that my entire digital life was truly compromised, because even the Apple rep was like, "We weren't really sure that was you, but we're letting you know what's going on."
Okay. And when did you realize that your relationship and the cybercrime were connected?
So when the relationship ended, it became pretty clear that something was amiss and that some of the activity that was happening during our relationship and post the relationship, that something just didn't add up, right? I think we've all had those gut feelings where it's like something's a little off here. But once we started combing through the data and getting access to data from Apple and others, and having former NSA and digital forensic specialists combing through the data, then it was like the light bulb went off. It's like, oh, well, now who, where, what, and how. And then it was, oh my God, this started before I even had an inkling that there was a challenge in the relationship. So it went way back. And so it was one of those like light bulb moments, but also like anger and betrayal. And so it was very surreal to realize how ingrained that person was and how involved they were.
That is pretty terrifying. Your mother's house actually became a gateway into your digital life. How did you explain that?
I had brought this person to meet my mom, and my team strongly believes that when they made a phone call on WhatsApp is when the signal was to the other people that were involved, that they were in my parents' house and that they were on the Wi-Fi because they were making a WhatsApp call. But we didn't know that they had access to my mother's router for 18 months. And so when I came across it, because I had trained myself how to look at forensic data, something that I don't think a lot of people ever want to learn, but I chose to take the time. I wanted to try and catch the individuals that were compromising. We had started playing like these disinformation games, like, "Hey, I'll be home for Thanksgiving," and I wasn't there. And, "Hey, I'll be home this day," and I wasn't there. And so I had logged in one early morning when I got to my mom's house, and I just had trained myself to check all the IP addresses and things like that. Like, this is something people shouldn't have to be doing in their personal life. And I was like, well, why is there an IP address accessing my Facebook account today and on Thanksgiving, but the IP address is currently in Spain? I'm not in Spain. I'm in San Francisco, California. Who could this be? So through the power of the internet and Instagram public profiles, I figured out who was in Spain, and that showed me that they had had access for quite some time. So it was quite the fun experience. But if I hadn't learned from the experts how to look at my identity data in that level of detail, I never would have put the pieces together.
For sure. I don't think most of us would. We'd just be scrapping around wondering what to do next. But I also think that's just such a personal place for this to start, your own mother's house being used against you. And that really does take us right into how this actually happened. So you knew more about security than most people. FA, the do's and don'ts, and you every year. Why does that matter?
I think it matters in a couple different ways. I think number one, unless you are 24/7 monitoring and detecting every bit and piece of your digital life, everything you connect to, and there's a lot of people in the cybersecurity world that do that, whether that's for themselves or for companies. I think that the normal everyday person that wants to connect on social media or, send emails or, look at websites, they really don't know how exposed we are online, and they don't, and this goes for me included, you don't really know how vulnerable you are. And so I think one of the biggest things that I learned through my own experience, and obviously talking to other people that are experts in the field or people that have gone through a similar experience of being hacked or targeted, is that it's the smallest mistakes that we make. It's constantly reusing the same password for years that have been part of 15 data breaches over the past 5 years. That all that data is just sitting somewhere in a cloud for bad actors and cyber criminals to compromise and hack and be able to use that against you, especially if you haven't changed your passwords or not using multi-factor authentication, even though it's not 100% bulletproof that you won't get hacked. At least it's another layer that you can add to your own security. So, and then I think for me, I wasn't aware of the sophistication of how you could breach someone's Wi-Fi router and compromise the credentials off of that router. And then you go on YouTube and it's like, oh, here's how you do it. And here's the software package that you can download and do it. And so now with AI, all of that is speeding up tremendously. And I think to get back to your original question, I just think people are not fully aware of every time we connect to the internet, we're vulnerable in some way. And so you can either choose to be overly cautious or just know enough that you have to constantly be paying attention.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think people choose to ignore it and just keep moving until something like this happens. I guess people don't think they have a reason not to, but what is the actual gap between knowing about security and actually practicing it?
I would break that question down into a couple areas. There are extremely, extremely talented cybersecurity people in the world. And I've been, unfortunately, very lucky to meet a lot of them because of what happened to me. I made phone calls to former NSA people, CIA, FBI, people that started the digital forensic practice for law enforcement agencies in a country. And they all heard my story and they were very happy. And I was very grateful and thankful for them to help me. But I think it depends on the level of sophistication that you need to have in your daily life, right? The way I've kind of boiled it down since I went through my experience was I had no idea that my cloud, whether that's an iCloud, a Dropbox, Amazon, could be so vulnerable. And that once you get a hold of a cloud account and all of your stored passwords are in there, people can pretty much run rampant in your life and create a lot of havoc. So I think from a security perspective, there are different levels of security that people should think about. And I think the first thing is that you need to really think about what your security and privacy plan is going to be for you and your family. And if you're a founder or, an executive or, whatever at a company, that you need to protect your employees 24/7 because employees are gateways into the enterprise and into the organization, like what would happen with me. We don't necessarily believe 100% that they were after me. It was more the access that they were after in terms of the crypto and my contacts and my clients that had, millions upon millions of dollars worth of crypto tokens. So in 2018, crypto's theft wasn't getting tracked as well as it is today. So I think at the end of the day, you should dive into security as far as you feel comfortable, but you should definitely have a very simple plan for you and your family to make sure that you're protecting your email, your banking, your financial accounts, and probably your social media, if that's important to you.
Yeah. Okay, for sure. In your particular situation, what was the evidence that led you to conclude that it was a coordinated effort targeting you or your company specifically?
The most clearest piece of evidence came in a few ways. The first clear piece of evidence was I had gotten access to data from Apple, and I was told by a former FBI and CIA agent how to look at my data. And he basically showed me how to run the report with what I was given. And someone that I had known during that part of my life before things happened was accessing my life after I had left that country. And that person was very tied to my former relationship. And so it was as clear as day. Their iCloud email address, their phone number, like all of it was right there. And then we were able to use that piece of information to basically like fan out to find out where that connection was coming from. And it was like their corporate office that I had been to years before, or this other location that I had been to with them at some point, right? But after
Right.
I had left the country, there were other things that came to our knowledge, where one of the Social Security number hacks where someone applied for a short-term loan. They took a picture of themselves accidentally off the reflection. So there was a reflection. They clearly had to take a photo to try and pass the KYC or know your customer validation. And they just took a dummy photo, but
Yeah.
it had a reflection of themselves off of the flash of the camera back to themselves. So we used that, and we had plenty of evidence to share with, local and federal authorities in two countries. At that point, it became fun to find more facts. So
I was going to say it must have been quite satisfying along the way, finding a little bit of information by bit.
well, yeah, I mean, once you know you're under attack, Chris Coleman, who's the founder and CEO at Red 5 Security, he said, once you know you're under attack, we have to get you into a safe place. And then once you're in a safe place, we have to start changing your behaviors, your devices, your email addresses, so we can get you back up and running. But we want to keep your existing operating systems running so that no one knows what's going on. And so once we started to do that, and I had essentially two different lives going in a digital world, we were able to start picking off things a lot faster and a lot easier because they were making mistakes, thinking that I didn't have people helping me. So it started to become fun after a while, but it wasn't really fun, in the long run. But
Yeah, in the
it
typical
became more
sense.
fun when we caught them.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. I just want to understand as well, what surprised you the most along the way about how unprepared the system was for this type of attack?
I think you're still seeing the unpreparedness today. So, for example, you're in Australia, right? So, Australia has taken a very strong stance about implementing digital identity practices across the country at a federal level to help prevent people's identities from being compromised through data breach. Whereas last week, the United Kingdom's new prime minister decided that they were going to scrap a digital identity program in favor of other programs. The US does not have a singular digital identity strategy. There are 13 different federal agencies that are tracking scams and frauds, but no one's really talking to one another. So what I really realized is that the big technology companies, we are the product, right? Our data, our usage, whether that's in social media or smartphones or, whatever, we ultimately are the product. And through competition, most people aren't willing to share. So you're not able to coordinate all the data. You have to go one by one. And that is a nightmare. The amount of emails and phone calls that my team and I had to make just to get access to my own data
Yeah,
was insane. So I
that's
think a lot of
frustrating.
it comes down to the lack of coordination and communication when bad things are happening.
Yeah, I hear you. That is frustrating, especially when it's your own data that you're trying to access. Could you walk us a little bit through your forensic investigation? I know you've given some samples of how
Yeah.
you found the person originally, but
Well,
I'd
I don't
love
want to
to.
give away too much
Yeah.
secret sauce, but I hired people that have done this for governments, and
Okay.
at a high level, they looked at every device and ran their software to find the open ports or the access points that were allowing me to be compromised. For example, we installed a retail piece of software that tracks all the incoming and outgoing IP addresses that are connected to your devices. That told us a lot of interesting information about where things were happening. They also worked really closely with a few of the big technology companies that we all know and use today, Apple, Google, Facebook, to get as much granular reporting access to the data that was on my accounts. And then they ran a bunch of their own analysis and came back and said, where were you on this day? Let me look at your calendar. Were you here then? Did you send an email from there? So they really did a deep analysis on what my digital footprint looked like. And once we started to grab one, we grabbed more, and it became very clear when things started to be compromised in my life.
Thank you. I think, the forensic work involved with something like this is remarkable on its own. But for people to understand, why this is actually so dangerous and why it can happen to anybody listening, I just want to slow down for a minute and have you, if possible, explain what synthetic identity theft actually is and why it's more dangerous than traditional fraud.
Sure. So synthetic identity theft is one of the fastest growing identity theft vehicles that cyber criminals or fraudsters are using. And basically what that does is it's combining different bits and pieces of your identity. So for example, it might say, here's Cheryl's social security number, but then Cheryl's phone number is different, or Cheryl's home address is different, or Cheryl's bank information is different. So they're going to take bits and pieces of what's real about Cheryl and they'll make it a different name, right? So they'll use Cheryl's social security number. They'll use Chris Smith as the applicant. And then I would have worked at FedEx or McDonald's or wherever. And then they apply for loans and a lot of them go through. And that's why there's billions of dollars worth of fraud every year, because our own verification systems are not yet fast enough to make the decisions. So synthetic identity theft, or just creating a synthetic identity, there are more machine identities on the internet, times like 100, than there are people on the internet. So, and
Wow.
that's only going to continue to explode, expand because of AI agents
Yeah.
and deepfakes and all the things that are happening in our life today.
That's worrying. And your social security number was used over 50 times. I just want to understand the full impact of that for you personally, to really hammer this home for people.
I had signed up for, I won't mention the name of the company, but a identity theft protection company. And they started sending me alerts after my identity had been compromised. And I kept going back to them, asking them, well, where is this happening? So I can actually call the company and see if I could put a stop to this, to let them know that my identity is being fraudulently used. And so they would send alerts that says, your identity has been compromised. Basically, we're sorry. We can't really help you with anything. So I got a tip to start calling Experian and Equifax and TransUnion. And then there are 2 or 3 additional credit unions that monitor the short-term loan companies. That's when I hit the home run. And I was creating a spreadsheet of okay, they applied on this day, someone applied on that day, and they weren't. Yeah. And I had to do it all by myself because of the amount of information that people didn't want to get out. And luckily, and I talk about this in my book, a company by the name of MoneyLion, their executive team saw that my identity was being used over 5 or 6 times. And so they helped me piece together some information that was shared. And so that was really helpful. So when I found people that was like, okay, this is wrong, we need to help him, I got way more information. But that's unfortunately not the way that, in my opinion, consumer security is currently working for everyone around the world.
Well done, Money Lion.
Yeah, they were very helpful. Yeah.
And I hope you don't mind me saying, but I understand from what I know of your case that your credit actually became toxic. Your identity was obviously being repeatedly flagged for fraud. You couldn't rent an apartment. I'd love for you to talk about that indirect damage.
I worked really hard to keep my credit score, above 800. And all of a sudden it dropped like 250 points. And I had to put a credit freeze across everything for 10 years because of the identity theft that I went through. So when you're out there looking for a new apartment in New York or Miami and your credit is on fire, they're probably not going to rent to you immediately. And so there are certain things that you have to do, at least here in the US. I had to get letters of recommendation from my attorneys that I really am Chris Smith. I mean, again, I have a very common name as well. So the accountant had to write letters. I had to constantly turn off the credit freeze and turn it back on anytime I wanted to make any type of major financial transaction, buy a car, apply for a new home. I bought a house during that time. So it made things, and still today, it just makes things that additional step or two that I didn't have to do beforehand. So there are other things, but can't go into them, unfortunately.
Yeah. I wonder, the social security number is from 1936. Why is it still our main identifier?
I think, well, at least in the US, I think, look, there's a lot of power within the states here in the US. And a lot of the states are starting to create their own digital identity programs and their own privacy and scam programs. And there's no real federal level mandate as of yet where we're going to start to look at new ways to identify Chris or Cheryl. So, in my opinion, I think that the social security number should be rethought through. It was great when social security came out to start tracking different programs but it's become the common identifier. And unfortunately, I would say that every single person's social security number has been compromised and is in some database somewhere. And it's just a matter of time before it gets used in some fraudulent way. So unless you've got a credit freeze and unless you've taken all the steps that I've taken, you're more at risk because of this number that we all carry as Americans, because it's tied to everything. So I think that there are better ways to move forward, but we'll see what happens.
Yeah. And I think we should definitely get more into that later. But I think having looked at the mechanics of what happened, the jurisdictions, the scale of this problem that we all have, I also want to explore what this actually does to a person living through it day to day. I want to understand what this costs you mentally. From what I saw, you were using burner phones, leaving paper messages, sending manuscripts by mail. How long did that last?
So I think this is a really important question. So I think, and I'm happy to answer all of them. I wrote a book about it. I'm obviously not ashamed to talk about it. There's a lot of research that's now starting to come out from Gallup and the Identity Theft Resource Center, who's a partner of mine in my book, that the emotional toll of the betrayal, the identity theft is actually outweighs the money that may or may not have been lost. Now, in some cases, people have harmed themselves because they've lost their entire savings because they made a mistake of trust. They just trusted the wrong person. I know someone that recently thought Chase Bank called them and told them to go buy gift cards to the tune of $9,000. And they gave them the gift card numbers. And 3 hours later, the money had already been spent. So they felt awful because they thought they were getting a call from their bank. So for me personally, I think the first emotion that I really felt was anger. It was, how could this person be involved? This person, how could that person be involved? Considering where I thought our relationship was, to the level of paranoia and anxiety of, are people paying attention to you? This is kind of post-traumatic stress syndrome stuff that a lot of people that have been victimized or targeted for identity theft go through. I know that I had some of that, I've worked through that and that's, we're good now. But when you're going through that type of exposure where you don't know where you're being attacked from, how you're being attacked. And mine went on for like 2 years. Like we kept finding stuff, usually it's like quick and like, that's it. But this kept going, right? This wasn't like it was over. And it wasn't easy, but there are a lot of people that don't seek help. Whereas I'm the type of person where I'm going to call people and get help because I have no idea what's going on.
Yeah.
It's not a weakness. It's more of like, I need to get this to go away and I need this.
Yeah.
Whereas a lot of people feel really ashamed and they shouldn't, because people were getting scammed to buy the Brooklyn Bridge 100 years ago. But this is tale as old as time. It's just it's moving faster now that it's digital.
Yeah. I think a lot of people would, blame themselves, but, not being able to trust friends, colleagues, people at work, that's going to have psychological, impact. And I think there's probably a clinical term that sits underneath a lot of what you're describing, like you said, potentially PTSD and hypervigilance, isolation, the inability to trust the people closest to you. How did looking at things through that lens and understanding what had really happened to you and naming that privately change things for you?
That's a good question. I think for me, the biggest thing was I took people at face value. How you presented yourself to me was like, okay, like this is who Cheryl is. I'm going to trust that this is really who Cheryl is. And I think what my experience did was it put me on the back foot. It was like, wait a minute. Okay, I'll take Cheryl at face value, but who is Cheryl? What is Cheryl's purpose in A, B, or C dealing with me now, right? So I think I put up a wall pretty quick and a lot of people weren't allowed over that wall. And over a couple of years, it finally came down. Now I'm just more vigilant about who's in my life, who's around me, who knows certain things about my life. I don't post as much on social media. I never kind of tag where I am. There's all these certain things and behaviors that have changed. I think in the long run, it's for the better. The
Yeah.
more information that you put online, it's there forever. It's not going away. But for me, it took me some time to like trust new people coming into my life. And I had never experienced that before. And unfortunately, I learned it later in life.
Thank you for being so open about all of that. I know it can't be that easy to talk
I've already
about.
written about it, so it's out there.
You have indeed, but writing about it and talking about it, it's helping the masses. So I do appreciate it. I just want to shift really briefly to the system itself, because a lot of what you went through does come down to real structural and jurisdictional gaps. What is the jurisdictional problem? I know we touched on it earlier, but a lot of the activity originated overseas. So that would have presented challenges.
So back in 2018, 2019, when this was going on, the level of cooperation and coordination amongst countries was not at the level that it's becoming. So just last year, the UN established something called the Cybercrime Treaty, where 65 countries have now agreed in principle to share more information about what's happening for multinational cyber crimes or people that are impacted. So the ability for me, it was kind of like the US was saying, well, we have to have the other country take over. And the other country was saying, well, the US needs to take over. You're a US citizen. And I was sitting in the middle saying, well, I was hacked here and I was hacked there. So both of you have responsibility to figure this out, because here's all the data, right? Here's the data from my US forensic person, and here's the data from my other country forensic
Yeah.
person. So that became really tough. And I think what I learned from that experience, so that people don't go, and I write about this in my book, is went down my path because of how personal it was. If you try and go after the cyber criminals that hacked your credit card, it's going to be impossible, right? And if you didn't lose $1 million or $10 million, the authorities, unfortunately, due to their resources, are not going to sit down and say, Cheryl, I'm really sorry that you went through,
Yeah.
but we have bigger fish to fry. So, but there are a lot of ways through technology that we can better ourselves in terms of the communication. The tech is there. It's just the
Yeah.
willing to connect everything.
Yeah. I mean, like you touched on, large technology companies often possess the data that might assist victims of cybercrime. But why is that obtaining that information just so hard?
Because if they started sharing all the information with every victim, they'd literally have to have thousands of people supporting this. That's why terms and conditions and terms of use and privacy policies and all the accounts that we sign up for, no one reads the terms of service. We're basically saying, yeah, well, we'll let you decide what you want to do with our data, because we really want to post, that we're at a club or, on some fabulous vacation. So it's protecting them as well. Like they know that we're the product. And, in my instance, I know that I'm the product, even with the service we're using now. All of this
Yeah.
is being sent up into a cloud, right? And can be cataloged and used later for whatever reason they want to. So it's just something that we've all accepted, right? But the first conversation that's becoming really interesting to me is that for many years, people were very privacy focused. And now people are like, everything's out there anyway. What's the point?
I think, we've painted a really frustrating picture of how broken the system still is. And I'm sure some people can relate. But for you personally, you didn't just survive this. You actually built something out of it. And that's really where I want to go next. You've made your trauma a mission, essentially. You founded Defend right in the middle of the attack. And you started writing your book during that experience as well. So I just want you to walk us through that.
So just for you to know, the word survivor to me feels strange, even though that probably is the right technical term. People survive way more trauma than what I went through. And people that have been compromised or have been through some sort of cybercrime have lost way more than I have. And so for me, that word is tough for me. But what I did was, when I can't figure something out on my own, I have to do the research and I have to figure out a way to build a product that would work for me and that could work for the masses. And so when I was going through it, I kept asking the experts, like, why is there not a product that can solve this? Like, why can't we build something that would at least make it better? right, than what's on the market today. And they kept saying, well, no one's had this much passion, or most people are not out there like willing to talk about what you went through. So why don't you use that as fuel to try and build something? So we did. My team and I, we built some really interesting tech, and we talked to a lot of the venture capital community, and we got close a few times to real fundraising, and it just didn't happen. And so one of the hard things as a founder is at some point you have to decide, or if you're an executive leading a project, when do you stop? And so my team and I decided that let's take all the learnings that we did from Defend. We had customers, we were in the app store, we were having conversations, we had people pay us for our service, but we were not going to be able to scale it in the way that we wanted to without serious funding, right? And when you look across what's happening at the government level, like in the UK, they invested 300 million pounds, I believe, over the next 3 years to combat fraud and scams just within the UK. Google today announced a $50 million investment across multiple philanthropy arms to start attacking this at a holistic level here in the US, right? So you need serious capital to address it, especially in the age of AI. And then in regards to my book, I know I'm dragging a bit here, sorry, but in regards to my
Go
book,
ahead.
well, I don't want the viewers to be, like, come on, get to so
So,
in regards to my book, every conversation I had, everything that I went through, I started writing down in a notebook. And I was like, at some point, this is going to be really valuable to someone else. And I just kept keeping track of things because my neighbor at the time, I bought this big house, in Westchester, and I randomly moved in next door to the district attorney of Westchester. And he's a former FBI agent, and he was responsible for the top 10 list for like 20 years. So as I'm going through this is my neighbor now. And so he said, you should start writing everything down. Anything that's weird, it's not coincidence, write it down. And so I started writing, and I had notepads all throughout the house, just writing things down anytime when something was weird. And I just started writing because that was another way that I used to help get through what I was going through personally.
yeah.
I was writing, and I'm still writing to this day about different topics and whatnot. But the book was ultimately, I went through this thing. Here's how I got myself into this mess in a personal capacity. Here's what I learned from all the experts. And here's what we should be thinking about as a society. And that's
Yeah.
what I did.
Nice. I appreciate that. And I think, many people will be interested to read the book as well. So we should provide some links to that for sure. Well, you're advising the Miracle and chairing the Defend Foundation at the moment. Is this about money or mission? And most importantly, where is your focus going now?
So the Defend Foundation is purely mission, right? What we realized by building Defend, the technology and the app and the things that we built from an agenic perspective is that you really need collaboration and coordination across many different vehicles in the long run. And a great way to do that in the long term is to create a nonprofit foundation. And so my team and I decided to stop on the corporate commercial side of Defend. We needed to take that piece of technology that we had developed and put it in a parking lot for a while, or a year, or however long it's going to take, until we can get the right partners involved from a mission perspective about building, coordinated digital public infrastructure. And so a lot of people are trying to do that now. And so for the Defend Foundation ultimately is a long-term project, and it's something that I'll work on, I would imagine, for the rest of my life. Cybercrime is not going anywhere. And the Miracle is a really unique opportunity for me because it combines so much of my different experiences in my life. So most of my career was in the programmatic advertising space. And then I got into digital identity and crypto. And then the last couple of years, I've been really focused on infrastructure. So the Miracle is a really unique opportunity for me to be part of a great team, and board of advisors is amazing. But they're building some really unique behavioral intelligence tools and technology
Nice.
for advertising in web.
Okay.
So that it combines all three of my experiences, and it's been a lot of fun to work on so far.
That sounds awesome. And, Privacy Pandemic has actually won awards already, and you've even been on Fox Business. How did it feel to turn, your situation into that offer?
When I put my mind to something, I'm pretty much going to make it happen. There are certain aspects of my book that I wish I could. For example, one of the big aspects that you and I briefly talked about, I wish I could be completely 100% honest about where, when, all those things. But when you get be in the world of that world, you have to be, lawyered up quite a bit and you have to be, careful. But long story short about putting the book out, my goal wasn't about my book. My goal was taking all the information that I learned from all these experts. I mean, there are 15 experts that we interviewed in the book and
Yeah.
giving that information to anyone and anyone that wants to read it and
Yeah.
go through it. Being interviewed by Maria Bartiromo was amazing. She's interviewed presidents and Elon Musk and me. Like, I'm not
Yeah.
comparing
That's
myself
awesome.
to them, but in any way, but like being interviewed by Maria, being on a few of these really privacy focused podcasts. And there are other media things that are coming that are really interesting and unique just from being open and telling my story.
Yeah. I think there are some pretty interesting parts to that. If you wouldn't mind just sharing a few of the craziest things you attempted to do to solve the situation, I think that would be good for the listeners.
Sure. So I think one of the craziest things that we finally came down to is we started having disinformation games where I would call certain people and say certain things to try and figure out if that would trigger a response. And I had a phone call with a family member who we thought may have been compromised through their iCloud. And we started saying certain, oh, we're going to, go after this person and we think we know information about that person. And it was just all made up. And the next day I got text messages from people that were close to that person. And it was like, got you. Or we started, doing other things that I won't go into that, nothing was illegal, but we were just, a lot of it was like, I'm going to be in San Francisco this week. And I wasn't, or it was a lot of that type stuff. Yeah.
I think you called some pretty big public figures as well, hey?
Okay. Thank you for reverting me back to that. So,
No, it's all good.
so some of the big swings that I may sound crazy now, but at the time they weren't. I picked up the phone and I called Richard Clark's office. For those who don't know who Richard Clark is, he was the former national security advisor to both Bushes and Clinton. And while I never spoke to him directly, his team was very helpful. And they introduced me to Chris Coleman, the CEO at Red 5 Security, who I mentioned earlier. I called Angela Merkel's office and tried to get a hold of her to
Yeah.
understand how they were putting GDPR together. And I had my friends, I lived in Germany for a bit. And when I was younger, and some of my friends are big time in the media business, and they're like, "Chris, you're insane." I'm like, well, there's no harm in calling. If they don't get back to me, they don't get back to me. And I made some other pretty senior level calls into some other technology companies. I never heard back from them, but ultimately I did hear from members of their team that were very helpful because once they heard what was going on, they wanted to find out what was going on. So, and how they could help. So I think the lesson I learned from that is don't be afraid to call anyone, especially in business. The worst thing they can do is say no or not
Yeah.
respond. And then you
Yeah.
move on.
I love it. I love that you took it to those extremes and taking a stab is what it's all about. Just before we move on, topics wise, please could you just give the top 3 things that Joe Public should do right now today to avoid what happened to you?
I think the first thing that everyone should do, and this obviously is different per country. So I think everyone should, at a minimum, have a credit freeze on their accounts. And that allows you to control the narrative much more because not every day someone's buying a car, renting an apartment or buying a house or making a purchase that you're going to need to have your identity verified. So I think the first thing that everyone should do is to put a freeze on their credit. And you can remove it at any time. The second thing that you should do is that you should continuously reevaluate your credentials, particularly with your passwords. And you don't have to do every website, right? You need to at least do your top 15 to 20 companies that you log into consistently every day. And that is everything from your home Wi-Fi router to your Apple iCloud, if that's what you guys, what you use. And I think that's a really important thing because if you are part of a data breach, you're not going to be notified for months or weeks. So if you're constantly changing things, then maybe you don't get hit as much. And then I would say the last thing is just be really mindful about how much information you're willing to put out there on the internet.
Okay.
Like,
Note to self.
I don't want to sound like someone's dad, but you don't need to tag your location everywhere you are. Or a lot of the experts will always say, post after you've left country A if you're on holiday, right? Post after you've left,
Yeah.
stuff like that.
Absolutely fair point. Good food for Gen Z. Look, you are somebody who stopped at absolutely nothing to find a way forward. And, we could call that passionate, we could call it delusional, even some might say.
Yeah.
But, I don't think most people have picked up the phone to Angela Merkel to make the system listen. I find that so impressive. But I'm just keen to understand how person as well from when you first started out, how is the 2026 version of Chris different to who you were when you first started?
I think nothing can break me now. I've been through enough now. There's like nothing you can do that. I mean, there are things I'm sure, but from a business perspective, like nothing will like break me at this point. I think the biggest lesson that I learned was don't be afraid to pick up the phone and call anyone to get help. And as a founder, you have to be delusional. If you don't believe in your
Yeah.
ideas so much that you are not like I was delusional about Defend. And I still am to this day that there will be a better way to protect people. I just haven't found the right vehicle for it yet, but I will, or someone will. And I want to be a part of that. But I think you have to be delusional if you're going to change the world, right?
Absolutely.
Look at Elon. Look at all the major companies out there, right? Oh, you're really going to go to space? Okay.
Yeah, I'm going to find a way.
You got to find a way. And I also think that my experience taught me it's okay if you can't quite get there. Because as a founder, which I'm sure a lot of the people are going to be listening might be founders or want to be founders, not every project gets to where you want it to go. And you have to be okay as an operator to walk away from something that you might be really passionate about. Because there is a line like, I'm going to ruin my life and spend all my money, delusional, or I'm going to get it to as far as I can go and I'm going to stop. And that's ultimately what I decided to do.
Yeah. And I think, none of these situations are failures in the typical sense. These are simply lessons, and the dots only tend to connect when we look back. I think Steve Jobs said that once. And so who knows where that'll lead next.
And 90% of businesses don't make it after the second year, third year, right? I think social media in a lot of ways is, what do you mean you didn't sell your company for $100 million?
But that's only half the story and part of the journey. The journey is still ongoing. And that's why now I want to look at some of those transferable lessons that you bring to the table for your future and your professional life. So, for example, if you were to take a chief strategy officer role or, a company like Stripe, Coinbase, Okta, Plaid, what type of things would you focus on now?
I think what I would want to understand if I ever walked into one of those organizations or even a smaller organization is where are we at today, and really spend a lot of time listening to not only people internally, because you're going to learn a lot from the people that are actually doing the work, and then going and speaking to customers. If you're not talking to your customers, you have no idea what's going on. And I found a lot of success in doing that at a couple previous companies that I had worked for. Before I had started my own company. But I think my passion now lies in kind of this in continuing to be an emerging technology, really focused on obviously finding ways to protect people or advance identity, privacy, security, whether that's, for enterprises or for people. But I think what I learned from my experiences, because my career path has not been necessarily linear. I haven't been in financial services or whatever my whole career. Commercialization is ultimately dependent upon people. And if you can figure out how to motivate your team and build the right products for your customers, commercialization, selling financial services or crypto, it doesn't matter. So,
yeah. Yeah, nice. Quick one as well. What would you say one thing every enterprise gets wrong about identity architecture would be?
well, I can't speak for put out a disclaimer there. I can't speak for every organization. I think the one thing that I would say that we really focused on at Defend was, Cheryl is not constantly inside of the office behind a firewall with her work environment. She's at home, she's traveling, she's client meetings, she's at Starbucks connecting to the router and Wi-Fi there, wherever you are. And I think one of the things that I learned from my experience and from working with experts that are CISOs, Chief Information Security Officers, they really want to protect every bit and piece of Cheryl's access. And a lot of companies don't think about Cheryl 24/7. They think about Cheryl 9 to 5 and protecting Cheryl only when Cheryl's in the office. So that's a holistic approach to identity protection that we could get better at in general.
Yeah. Yeah. What should boards and companies demand from their CIO? Well, their chief identity officers. Yeah.
Again, I cannot speak for every around the world, but I think having a chief information security officer or a chief security officer on the board to help everyone understand the game that is happening in cybersecurity and in fraud protection and all of it is increasingly taking off. I think you're starting to see way more boards bring in CISOs or chief security officers because that expertise is needed.
Yeah, for sure. Like you say, with the rise of AI as well. Are you pursuing board roles, Chris? What would you look for in a board position?
So I would be interested in joining a board where my commercialization background could be helpful, particularly
Okay.
in emerging technologies or helping people understand what their product strategy is, or if a founder just needs to talk to someone that's had success in one company that I founded and not as much success in the next. There's value in not always, getting to the finish line, right? You can take a lot of learnings from that too.
For sure. For sure. I mean, if you were on a board facing an identity crisis now, what would your first questions be?
Who let this happen? No, I'm just kidding. I think we would have to basically start from the beginning. How are we addressing identity now? What are the tools that we're using that allowed this to happen? What are the policies that we have as an organization that allowed this to happen? Who's responsible for A, B, and C? I mean, something like Mythos, I believe, is Claude's security product. The fact that they're finding that many vulnerabilities across enterprise early partners is great and also concerning, right? But, the reality is that humans can't do everything. So what I would do in that crisis is I would probably take the advice that I got in my own life and just expand it further. We need to isolate the challenges. We need to get back up and running. And these are things that they're already doing. But, I can't really speak to, every situation is different.
Yeah. I mean, would that be a similar approach if, say, a Series B startup asked you to build digital identity or trust infrastructure?
So if a Series B company came and asked me to help them with their identity infrastructure, I would think at this point the level of agentic AI that would need to be evaluated and agentic identities would be really interesting to think about to protect not only their employees, their customers, the entire system. They would need, I mean, obviously there could be lots of things that we would need to think through, but if you're starting from scratch, you need to protect the house first, protect everyone that's associated with the house, employees, contractors. I mean, there are thousands of instances where a contractor had an old username and password and someone accessed the company through that, right? So there's a lot of companies that are locking down those identities. So I would want to make sure that we protect internally first, and then how are we protecting everyone else around us? You got to kind of build outward.
Fair. What kind of sector or type of startup would need this expertise, your type of expertise, the most right now? Where would it have the highest impact?
Good question. If I had had a linear career, I would say fintech or ad tech to be
Yeah.
serving, but that's not who I am. I think any new emerging company, any new emerging technology, they're going to need ways to commercialize and talk to customers and investors about how their technology connects and why it's different, right? I'm sure you've heard millions of pitches from founders about why their technology is the best and why they're in the upper quadrant of the magic quadrant, and why their technology is going to be completely different. And then you start to ask the hard questions like, do you have the patent?
Yeah.
What is your core differentiator? What is the thing that you do better in the world than anyone else? And when you start to dive into those type questions, you start to learn a lot more. And so because I've been an operator for others, I've founded 2 companies, I've had an acquisition, I understand those things now. And so I want to help you make those realities. Like, why are we the best? Because we do this really, really well, and no one will touch us because of A, B, and C. So sometimes you just get so excited and delusional, using your word, as a founder that you don't think through all
It's a
the questions.
compliment. Yeah. Fair. I I mean, are you going to continue? Are you going to build a platform, a speaking circuit, educational initiatives around privacy pandemic?
There are conversations happening. I would reserve those for another time. There are interesting conversations around a digital safety platform that I'm having with other leaders in the category. And that's a lot to do with the Defend Foundation and the nonprofit that we started. So
Yeah.
more to come there.
Okay. And would you be open to businesses reaching out to you for help though?
Recruited for the Miracles advisory opportunity. I love getting involved and helping solve big challenges. I'm definitely not ready to just sit at the beach. I get burned and I get bored at the beach. So I would like to keep doing fun and interesting projects. So yeah, of course.
Nice. Look, two final questions for you, Chris, because I know I've kept you and we've taken a lot of your time today. But look, if you could influence one policy change at the government level to fix identity, what would it be?
In the US, there should be a mandate that everyone is leveraging the same digital identity credential and not state by state. That would go a long way in helping every local and federal law enforcement agency to track down how people are being compromised or how their identities are being used. I think that would be the biggest thing.
Nice, nice. And look, what legacy do you personally want to build around identity infrastructure and how does that shape what's coming next?
I think for me, it's not necessarily, I mean, legacy is a big word. Thank you for that. But I think for me, it's more about how can we influence decision making based on data and research and really implement it. So if I would have a legacy, the Defend Foundation would be promoting really hard hitting research and technology behind it so that people can use it in an open source way, or maybe there's a company out there that really cares about this, evolving consumer security. So I don't think I'm thinking about legacy, but if I had to have a legacy, I would say that my writing and my point of view had some impact on someone somewhere.
Thank you. Is there anything else you'd want to share before we go?
No, this has been great. I really appreciate your time. And I
Absolutely.
do have one question for you. What did you learn today?
I learned I need to change all my passwords now and be less happy on social media. Everybody doesn't need to know everything. Yeah, I'm going to go straight away and do that immediately. But from
That's
what I've learned as well,
That's usually people's first reaction is, "Oh my God,
yeah,
I haven't changed my iCloud password since I got my iPhone."
yeah, yeah. I mean, you just don't think about it until you hear these stories. But, you've turned one of the worst things that could happen to an operator into a mission that could actually protect millions. And I just want to share three things from what I've seen from you that our listeners should take away from the conversation, as well as what I take away. Number one, security expertise doesn't protect you necessarily from vulnerability. None of us are immune. Number two, the infrastructure we rely on is fragmented at every individual layer, corporate layer, governmental layer, and they don't communicate with each other, so we can't rely on that. And three, if this can happen to someone like Chris, yourself, it can happen to any of us at any level. And that is genuinely terrifying, but it's why your work, Chris, matters. Privacy Pandemic is out now. The Defend Foundation is doing critical work, and I suspect we're going to be seeing Christopher in some pretty significant leadership roles in the next few years. Chris Smith, thank you for joining us. Thank you for the conversation, and thank you for working to improve digital safety and trust.
Thank you very much.